Um, I think it's the next Nobel Prize winning question, whether we fix this fiscal federalism thing, and then the sub question is how much political federalism is necessary first, but feasible second to underpin fiscal federalism, because we can, I mean, in the Carl Schmittchen sense of a sovereign is who decides about the emergency situation, yeah? In that sense of Carl Schmitt, today's European sovereign is ECB. It's not going to work. It goes for a moment, it buys time, it's not going to work in terms of legitimacy, yeah? And I think the system has to cope with the question whether we want, I mean, assuming we go step by step, and we do this debt mutualization thing in steps. And the first is a common deposit scheme banking union, which is a bolder banking union than now in the conclusions. But then you go for the redemption fund, so the debt of the past, before going in the third step for the debt of the future, which is Eurobonds. Assuming that this happens, and I wouldn't bet today, yeah? I think, like you, it's necessary, ultimately. I could imagine that we are very slowly approaching to such a momentum, and that the moment you approach it, it gains gravity and inertia, and at some point you end up, and it's a, say, a decade-long process, like the 3 steps plan of the council conclusions were for 10 years, yeah? Within the next 18 months, you do banking union, you have read the council conclusions. And so assuming that we go there, we are still living with the question, how do we work out European legitimacy, yeah? And the question, the real question is, do we want to have this legitimacy in a more executive, discretionary style, like the French, or do we want to have it in a parliamentarian style, like the Germans? This is the old question was French intergovernmentalism versus German supranationalism. The question of tomorrow is French discretionary executivism versus German parliamentarism. That is the policy question for the next years. My assumption would be that if you don't solve it in the German way, the chances that you solve this are slim. Yeah? Which would request that the French engage into discussion about what is a parliament and what should it do. Which brings you to questions like, should we give the right of incentive to the European Parliament? And, yeah? I think we are only starting this discussion, and I think there's 500,000 cultural things behind. But you are right in saying, I think, that if we let it go, then we have created through the Euro crisis more economic divergence than convergence. And the fact that this convergence will last and we don't build an umbrella in overcoming the systemic problems of the Eurozone, this divergence will drive us apart. There's a fair assumption to if we don't act by default, the chances that this happens are grand. Yeah, that would be my answer. Revision of the treaty, yes. I mean, we had this discussion. I'm happy to say that the ECFR, I was the first on the market, and I'm still very proud, because already in April last year, I think it was, in March last year, 2012, I organized a discussion with Wolfgang Schäuble in Berlin. 200 people. Does Germany need a new constitution with 146? Yeah? And as many times in discussions, there was an opening. For a couple of months, it was tangible that some people were exploring the public space, this argument. So between basically December 2011 or early 2012 and, say, summer 2012, Schäuble and others. Yeah? And then it was buried. Yeah, it was buried when Sigmar Gabriel said we need a grand campaigning on Europe for the elections, and then he didn't get the chancellery position, and then the 146 argument was buried for the time being. Yeah, so we tested it out. We said no for the moment, probably because the risks are high that you lose it. It can come back, I think. I think it might actually come back, because we are basically so much exploring the red lines of the constitutional limits that at some point we just need to touch them and to overcome them. Yeah. And the question then will probably be whether we do this in a national context or whether we do it in a pan-European context. And it would be more clever even if we could work it out to do it in a pan-European context, which is this question of a European constituent and European referendum and what have you. But and then I think it's winnable. I actually do think it's winnable, yeah, because I don't talk always to elites. Sometimes I do people, and if when you do people, you can win on Europe. Yeah, it's really depending on the discourse you take, and if you let go all this discussion about regulatory and concumbers and you know, the hatred against if you let that go and you make the strategic points about Europe and the future, you can win people, at least in Germany, on Europe. I'm deeply convinced on that, deeply. The strategic capacity, the European and the German. Well, let's put it this way. I think we neglected it in the past years, obviously, and Germany was for much in that, yeah, Libya, Mali. And the hope is that we are getting better. I mean, there is some hope after that, now that we are going for the December Council on CSDP. There is some hope that this pooling and sharing discussion is now gaining momentum. You can clearly see the Dublin statements 2 or 3 days ago. I cannot anticipate and project answers and responses, but what you can say as of today is that the discussion is coming back. So awareness is coming back, discussion is coming back, momentum is coming back, and normally when these things are there, then something happens. Yeah. That's not that we will see the big European army in the December Council, but that Germany starts to have a discussion about Parlamentsvorbehalt and how compatible our system is with GSDP, and that this merger pooling discussion starts to be more serious, where we really want to break down sort of, okay, who now produces what and who gets which jobs in the business. And so I think it's coming under budget pressure, and we can only hope that this is another learning curve for Europe to just improve on this. Yeah.
Yes, Morten would like to jump in on this, or should we take some more? There are lots of other people. Okay. There are lots of others, but let me take the opportunity to ask 2 very brief ones myself. When we wrote the Europe Review report, and which one, we traveled to Germany, and one of the things that when we had interviewed several people in Germany, they said they were looking for like-minded people in Europe. You mentioned that Germany is becoming a new leader, but at the same time they are losing some of their old friendships. But they are in somehow desperate search for like-minded people, countries. So just a brief question then is, if the Franco-German relationship is struggling a bit, where would this new Germany look for their new friends? One obvious thing is Poland. Is Poland the new France somehow? And the other thing is, Merkel is coming to Oslo next week. Is it kind of this north-south divide emerging in Europe? Stronger north-south divide. Is Germany kind of a Mittel-Europa country, or is it located shifting more towards the north? So that's the question. And the other point is, you mentioned that Germans are increasingly sensitive to the economic inequalities in Germany, and I think that's a very important point. And if you look at the data, you see it's not that big difference between inequalities in Germany and the UK and even in the US. Kind of, they are getting closer and closer to each other, the Gini. But at the same time, we see lots of inequalities emerging within Europe. 58 million people, isn't that? No, 28 million people in Europe are unemployed. 50% unemployed Spanish youth. Huge social catastrophe. And many would blame Germany somehow for this. What kind of sensitivity do Germans have for this social catastrophe unfolding in southern part of Europe? And the potential social risk, uncertainties, destabilizing forces in the society such an unemployment and social crisis could have. So that kind of thing would also be interesting to hear your remarks on. Ola.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Lars Ulleng, journalist. It was very interesting to hear your
explanation how the Germans really decided to do whatever is necessary. But the context, what is necessary, seems to change. Last year, the issue was what's the maximum interest rate that the euro can bear, before it splinters. While as at least outside Germany, many would say that this year the big question is what's the maximum unemployment number that the euro could bear, not from a moralistic point of view, but from the point of view before Greece or Spain implodes. And I wonder, since you were talking about narratives being very different in very countries, is that type of narrative there? And then my question would be, in terms of the political possibilities, would they change much after the German election? For example, if there was a consensus, we don't have to agree exactly what is needed, but assume that to tackle unemployment, to keep Europe together, you would need to clean up the banks now, not in the future. Immediately, actually, you need to do it perhaps 2 years ago. You need to deal with the debt overhang, so now and not in the future. And you may even have to conclude that the fiscal compact is part of the problem and not the solution. Is it conceivable that the world and the narrative and discussion in Germany can change so much after the election that all these things could be tackled, assuming now, just for the argument, that all of these things really are necessary for the euro to survive? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ola. Last time I saw Ola, he was talking to Draghi, the Nobel Prize thing. But yeah.
Okay, Øystein Noring, Professor Emeritus at the Norwegian Business School. I would like to ask Ulrike a question about the restructuring of the world economy and its impact on the Franco-German couple. We see all daily the transfer of production, profits, trade from the North Atlantic basin to Asia. Increasingly, international trade is centered on Asia, especially China and other countries. Germany has adapted to this better than almost anybody else. China is now the leading market for German exports. Germany is one of the few countries with a trade surplus with China. This means that Germany obviously has a niche in the world economy, which is prospering. And that the German business interests are increasingly looking east, including to Russia, as a source of not only raw materials, but labor. Russia will have to industrialize to create employment, and this is something the Russian leadership is finally understanding. And this means that Germany's interest in its economy, its commercial, its trade interests, which are very important politically in the longer run, are less and less centered on the North Atlantic, and more on the Asian, including, and also the Russian market. The question is, will France, which has an uncomfortable but conscious position as a junior partner to Germany, nobody wants, France does not want to be the leader of a Latin bloc. The Latin countries would not like to be led by France. The French option may be to look closer to Britain and the US. And this is the strain. How do you see these things emerging in Europe now, with Germany increasing there and France feeling a bit left out, maybe looking for other solutions? Thank you.
Should take one more?
But then you stop, huh?
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Yeah, please.
My name is Berg, retired from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you. Two short questions. First, more of a comment. The talk is very much about national politics, the French doing this and the Germans doing that and the English doing that. My question would be, in all this talk about national politics and at the time of the economic restraint, what happened to the European project? Is there still a European project? How would the European Union like to see itself projected in Asia, in Latin America? Are we all now bogged down in national politics? Second question would be a European defense and security policy. Now, with the American pivot towards the east and the Asian continent, aren't we now faced with a situation where the European Union and European countries will have to take a much more independent, responsible position in areas of security bordering very close to Europe, as the French are doing in Mali, and as the French and British took in Libya, with the Americans leading behind, and which the British took before in Sierra Leone. Isn't that, that's my question, isn't that a question which in a way changes the European scenario for a European, let's say, common security and defense policy, and which also has to lead to a somewhat radical change in what are German perceptions about behaving militarily out of Europe, so to speak? Thank you.
Okay, 4 topics then. New friends and friendships. Unemployment as the new target, or all this tall order left for the Eurozone to survive. Geopolitics and German location. And then out-of-area operations and security dimension. Please.
Although I wrote this funny piece that Poland is the new France for Germany, it was such a joke, you know. I mean, the best articles are those you write in a joke, you know. I remember once I wrote a thing on women and it landed in the FT, although I struggled hard to get pieces into the FT, you know, and then the women piece. It's interesting what flies. Anyway, it was a joke in the sense that there's no replacement and substitute for France. I will come to that back when I answer your question, but in terms of what makes Europe happen and what is the glue for Europe, I'm still old school. Critical mass is France and Germany, and there's no and no and no substitute and replacement. The European Union is finished if you don't get France and Germany along. Germany can run Europe not alone. There's no other partner out there who could replace France. It's a question of critical mass, it's a question of cultures, it's a question of what do you bring together, or how broad is the consensus, the socio-cultural weighting votes, and whatever. No replacement. And I come back to what problems derive from this. Yeah, so that was the first question, and there was also the I think you also, but then the other was the social inequality, and it's obviously the question of the day of the next months to come. Sort of the how many unemployment figures can we bear? Yeah. I can say that the German awareness that we cause problems elsewhere in Europe is close to zero, which is a pity in itself, because it brings me back to the discussions of communications. I always say that the Euro discussion, and I'm actually writing a book about this, yeah, but we need to shift from Old Testament to New Testament. Yeah, Old Testament is Auge um Auge, Zahn um Zahn. New Testament is we were all guilty and we move out of this together. Yeah. And Neues Testament, New Testament is also you point with one finger, you get 3 fingers back. Huh? I mentioned Landesbanken, reckless lending, and the discourse capacity in Germany to go over the self-responsible aspects of Germany messing up the Eurozone, not acknowledging the German part of responsibility, but only pointing to what Germany does, which impacts on the others, but not then seeing the impact. You beggar the neighbor. Yeah, I mean, we are not able intellectually to have this discussion in Germany. The Lagarde discussion was the moment where most people in my own relationship field started to become not anti, but sort of less European, because the argument is, shall we reduce our productivity for, you know, I mean, this Lagarde argument that there's a problem of domestic demand and that not everybody can be an export country, that not everybody can bake the cake, but somebody needs to eat the cake, and that we are in a symbiosis between creditor and debitor nations. This is just not flying in Germany. There's an intellectual incapacity to scrutinize these arguments, which is astonishing and which is a problem, because it's a discursive problem. The moment you have an assumption in Germany that we do it right and that the others are better in doing it like us because we just do it right, and you can see the figures, the export, and so, you can possibly not bring the other side's argument into this discussion. And here I see a really problem, because if we do not bring the narratives together, Old Testament, New Testament, then the capacity for Germany to go for politics of symmetric adaptation instead of asymmetric adaptations is close to zero. Yeah, close to zero. You come with all these legal arguments, but then and that's the second novel. Yeah, I gave you the first novel, yeah, about Heinrich von Kleist, Michael Kohlhaas, rather die than give up your principle is the whole Bundesbank story, yeah. But the other novel is Max Frisch, yeah, Biedermann und die Brandstifter, yeah. You think you do it right, but actually you're laying fire, yeah. And this is also a very German sort of, we think we do it right. Aren't we doing it right, yeah? But we are laying fire. Landesbanken beggar the neighbor. Oh, no, we are just good. Yeah? And it's a problem. And well, I write my book, perhaps that's part of making the consent. I don't know, but the question is a very valid one. Realizing that the fiscal compact is part of the problem in the way we basically sacralize the fiscal compact now as the only solution for the whole thing. You know, this is climbing down Olympus, yeah? And I start to, you know, in a Foucault sense of gouvernementalité, sort of, you know, how a system can, it's difficult to climb down Olympus if you run yourself so much into an argument, yeah? So I hope we can, and, but it will take time, and it won't be easy. But it brings me to sort of what is going on here, sort of how many unemployed can the other countries bear. I think what is happening, to make just that last sentence, what is happening in the last year is that every European country in a way did its catharsis in the way that every country had to answer the question, what price am I paying for Europe? Yeah? The Greek answered this question with a very high price, but still the country stands because the national discourse in these countries is everything is better than going back to the times before the Obristen. Yeah? Very important to notice that you still have 70% of Greek actually wanting the euro, despite babies dying in hospitals in Athens. Yeah? I mean, what a courage of this country. Yeah? And I'm told that the discussion gets better in Greece. Yeah? Now that we come so far, we do the. Same for Spain, 50% unemployed youth, but the discourse of these countries is that they fixed their national narrative to Europe since ever Franco left. And the fear to be left behind is bigger than anything they are experiencing. So Spain also answered a big, bold yes to we stay at any price. And so that Italy is the Monti thing, did the same thing and will hopefully continue, yeah? The Germans had the inverse price. We were the go global alone country, yeah, and then realized a minute before midnight or a minute before noon, we realized that it's not so comfortable in the bed with China and, you know, Libya and security, that we better normative embedment and we better pay a price for Europe, even though it's so tempting for us to go global alone on the economic scale. We are clearly, you know, it's a Marxist setting. Economy drives our conscience versus East, but the normative consensus wants that we pay a price for remaining in the normative bed of Europe. And that's the answer to your question. I think we do the calculation now. We got over the temptation, yeah? It's like Goethe, wie hältst du es mit Gott, yeah, in Faust, yeah? And we avoided Mephisto, yeah? I hope that this country, for the time being, we avoided Mephisto, and I think we are just getting to the point that we are ready to pay a normative price for a normative consensus remaining in Europe, although the economy drives us global. And the thing here is that we will be able to do this only if the French get that very message, that we cannot change, that therefore the French at least need to speed up a little bit, so that for us it doesn't overstretch us, that the economy drives us different where the policy consensus should. Yeah, because the French are still dreaming of Europe forteresse. Yeah, and they're still dreaming of a close Europe, which is, you know this, yeah. And the German society has a consensus that this country will always do the very necessary to stay in the global market, and the French do not have the same consensus. Yeah, and I think the policy choice of Hollande is now whether Hollande does Mitterrand 2 and can bring this same consensus to France, that France does the very necessary to be compatible with the global market, then it's easier for Germany to go against the temptation and to hold the normative consensus. In case that the French should strongly go against, like Mélenchon arguments, then it will be very difficult for Germany. But I don't think they will strongly go against. I think they will slightly go against, and slightly go against is right, because that's the answer to the question of the Mr. behind you. Because if the French hold slightly against that German argument, what would it mean? It would mean fiscal harmonization, a little bit of more social discretionary policies, and so on and so forth. So basically, it would increase the price for Germany to stay in Europe, but and make the price against the temptation a little bit higher. But it would, at the end of the day, for Germany be the best of the two worlds. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Nils Morten, would you like to add?
I didn't do the CF...
yeah, you can jump in on that.
Two very brief remarks on this last point. First, I'm convinced that when the economic problems get even worse, and they are not looking too well at the moment, I think the government will come together and create other defense solutions. They are getting too expensive in the present circumstances, and the price of modern weapons are going up and up disproportionately quickly. So the incentive is very strong to create more common defense in Europe. Sorry. Yeah. That's the first point. The other point, which was not touched too much today, was that...
I think you have to put it on as well.
Okay. Okay, better? Yeah. Yes. It's, of course, the effect of globalization. Which role has globalization had in this European discussion? And I think it's very important. And one could see a development where the support for euro is coming back, being strong, from people who will say we need the euro to conserve and to conduct a conservative policy, to preserve what we have got in Europe, without the elan to really start being competitive. It's a kind of protectionist attitude. And then it will be decisive which are the active big countries in the EU. Will Germany and France be alone? And then you could feel that the French protectionism, the instinct, will be more dominant. And you could have a situation where a lot of countries in Northern Europe, including Germany, would work doubly hard to keep the British in EU. I don't think they will leave, but they will, if they stay on, there will be a strong voice for an open, a competitive version of the European economy. And they can even, if you look 10 years ahead, find that euro could be a solution to their own, or at least a contribution to a solution of their own economic problems, which are not very good looking.
Thank you, Nils Morten. Ulrike, would you like to make a final remark on the security question? Or?
I mean, I take this question really serious. Is there a European project left? Yeah, and because at least the romantic European project is finished. Yeah, the romantic European project was that it's a peace project which is paid by the US, roughly. Yeah, and then we got a 20 years breathing time between Maastricht and today until we realized the real price of Maastricht, and now we are tagging Maastricht, and the price tag is high in terms of fiscal costs, but also in terms of sovereignty cost. And still, I would argue that because most countries exit the UK, responded positively to the catharsis question, in a way. I think we are, in this discussion, far away than, say, in 2011. I was really concerned in 2011, yeah. So hopefully we can make it. I'm much more concerned if you say the European projection, sort of, which is beyond the national idea, that now that we are confronted with the price tag in fiscal, but also in the political sense, sovereignty, that we are coming to the questions which we cannot solve. Yeah, because if we are serious about fiscal federalism, and then we should be serious about political fiscal federalism in whatever way. Yeah, I wrote an article about European Republic, because I want to move away the discussion from United States of Europe. It's completely silly. We don't want to copy the US. It's an old-fashioned. We don't go far with United States of Europe, because the nation state is the democracy problem in the way you want to shape a pan-European democracy. If you say European Republic, you get a different discussion, because you have European citizens constituting a European whatever. It's just a proposal, yeah? But if you start seriously thinking about post-national democracy making, you start thinking about emotions, language, whatever. You come to culture, and it really starts to be very complex. That beyond sharing of capabilities or pooling and sharing approaches and the more technical aspects that we may solve, yeah, in terms of building up strategic capacity and even then, if you talk European army, you talk about the interoperability of troops, you're again with language, you are again, you see. And the more I think it over, I still think we have a gorgeous adventure in front of us. But our mobilization capacity in terms of can you get enough people passionate about it, building a pan-European democracy? I don't know. I mean, at least it's huge work ahead, yeah? And we should be sometimes, I mean, just reflecting this would be part of the solution. Reflecting the gigantesque task which is ahead, yeah? Because when you say European projection, you say a European normative projection. So we are entering a state-building exercise, a European state-building exercise, yeah? And we don't even dare to speak this out, yeah? Because what we are really doing is transpassing notions of sovereignty in the Jean Baudin sense. What we are really doing is overcoming budget sovereignty in the classical sense. What we are really doing, you see my point, yeah? And we are not even engaging citizens in this because we don't speak like this about the project. Yeah, we still do as if everything remains the same. We just do a little bit more Europe. Yeah, the thing is, if we do more Europe, then nothing will remain the same, and it would require a very, if you talk projection, it would require a very different discourse, starting by sheer semantics. Yeah, telling German citizens that a BMW is not German, that it's that the European value chain is anyway European, that there's no German value chain, that in a BMW you have Italian leather seats and French wheels, Reifen. You see my point, yeah? And I just hope that we can break up the discussion into this dimension, because I think it's the chance. But then you talk about overcoming the nation state. That's basically what it means, at least in the technical sense, not necessarily in the emotional sense, but in the technical sense of sovereignty.
Okay, thank you. Now we started 5 minutes late, and now we end 5 minutes late, so we keep it. I would just say that thank you very much, Ulrike. I had hoped that this discussion would kind of take us a bit away from the technical side, because at least in this country it's important to hook up to, and also take us a bit away from the institutional side. And I think you have somehow over-fulfilled my ambitions. I think you gave a very nice presentation overview, bringing in lots of the complexities of the developments, at the same time making it in a very clear and stringent way. So I really like to thank you. I'm really glad, and I'm also glad that so many people were here, and also so many competent people, important people in the Norwegian public debate on Europe. So this was a very nice session. I also like to thank you, Nils Morten, for making your remarks and sharing your experiences with us. So on that note, I guess many of you, or some of you, might have a skiing break next week or starting this weekend, so perhaps you might think and ponder upon all those issues you brought up towards the end about the future of the nation state, how to deconstruct value change, etc. Okay, thank you very much.